For those of you tuning in, we are here for discussions and waiting for my dad to get on. I'm just finishing my coffee. Until we hear from him, I'll go ahead and update everyone as to where we are. Our big kickoff is this Thursday. We are super excited. We will I believe we have 8, and here he comes. He's coming, adding on. We're getting faster at this, I think. It's connecting, and there you are, Dad. Hi. Good morning. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Looks like he's got a new device on. How's that working? Dad, can you hear us? Well, I seem to see a confused look. Not sure. Looks like he's got an earbud in, so maybe he's trying to connect with Bluetooth, but I'm not seeing a response. Now, he's taking it out now, so maybe we'll go ahead and get started. Dad, can you hear us? Can you hear? Well, we seem to have an issue. We'll go ahead and wait on him a few minutes and see if he gets connected. We certainly can see him, but he's not responding. Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Could you hear me when could you see me or hear me when I was tapping the ear?
I was kind of going both ways, and then I said, well, the heck with it. I'll go the way I know best. So
yeah, sometimes when we get...
So it is an exciting time. I did hear some of your comments opening. It's going to be an exciting week.
It is going to be an exciting week. I will share that the last 3 days we have lived exclusively in the RV. We intentionally changed locations every day, just like we will around the country. We attended between 2 and 3 events every single day. We managed all of the children and food and all the logistics of anything from showering to figuring out how to use all the hoses on the RV. We had a little trouble figuring out the wrappers actually covered some of the information that tells you, for example, the difference between black and brown water and fresh water, and you cannot mix these up. It's very important to get it right.
Right.
Yes. But I'm pleased to say we adjusted really well. So I'm confident that we're going to be ready. The kids found their routine. I found my work routine. We're even able to live stream remotely, and we're successful with that. So I'm excited. I think we're really prepared. We've got some, the basic packing to finish up, but we figured it out. So we'll see if I ever want to get into a house again.
Hey, let me assure you, I've thought several times about, if I was young, I'd buy a motor home and say the heck with it. If my job opportunities could present themselves, and I just move my house wherever I needed to go. And you can get a pretty nice home. It's pretty nice,
and you can stay in some places that are really nice too. I mean, the kids were all in the pool having a great time, and the first place we stopped, we were right on the water. So if you picked a lakeside space, it was a great view every morning, and to be able to, have fire pits and hang out. And even at one point, one of the kids asked, "Where's Madison?" I said, "Oh, she's down the street playing with a neighbor kid." There are kids running around as well, and they were all making friends. And so it really was like it was a house four doors down.
Well, I think there's a lot to say about it. I think the opportunities around, I mean, we live down here where tourism is, crazy anyhow. So, but I've told young people, I said, one of the biggest challenges for seeking opportunities and jobs and stuff is the movement part. And I said, if you stuck the same amount of money into a very nice motorhome. I'm talking one that's very, very livable. I said, your opportunities are actually greater because you have very little complicated move, which is really one of the biggest challenges and why people decide not to do it. It doesn't alleviate the need for, figuring out schools and that type of thing. But the fact is you're mobile, you're comfortable, and you certainly don't have the hassles of owning a real home.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot that people just think doesn't happen in a real home, and you can eliminate some of that. I mean, there's always pride that goes along with different things, and so it's not for everybody. But I think a young person, before they settle down and want to lock themselves into something, for the first 10 years after school or whatever, they want to kind of give themselves opportunity around and move a little bit, be a little more, movable within their lives. I think that's
I would agree. Lori
definitely
said
a
she wants
good
to
option.
buy a mobile home, and I will tell you that cost-wise, because that can be an interesting point. So, Dad, what you're talking about on those high-end ones can run you $500,000 easily, and they certainly are fancier. But in our case, we went with one. We spent $70,000 on it, and it has 4 full bunk spaces, and that means designated bunks. So not like trying to convert the couch or the food space or any of that kind of stuff. So each kid has their own bunk space, and then I have a double bedroom, and everybody's got enough location to be able to fit all of their stuff, which is really great. And then it costs you anywhere from $20 to $60 a night to stay somewhere. So you're exactly right. There's very low maintenance. We were also able to get to a point where we could plug in and get up and running in the RV within about 5 minutes. That is pretty darn fast. We can pack back up and get on the road within about 10. And then also what was interesting was the ability to maneuver. So in our case, we have a 31-footer. So it's a little smaller than the giant ones, but extremely easy to maneuver. I drove it into the city. I parallel parked in the city. I was able to back in and back out of places. And now with Uber, you literally can just find a parking lot close enough and then Uber or take a train wherever you need to within a city. And outside the city, you can park at any Walmart. And we just kept the generator on. So the kids basically just treated it like a house. And if they wanted to go do stuff, they did. If not, they just stayed put and I would go do my work. And it is surprisingly easy. Yeah. So I'm excited. I'm excited. Well, let's get to today's topic. I'm going to pass it to you and get us started on what we're going to learn today or challenge each other.
Well, well, I mean, it's probably, in every subject we've covered is a heck of a lot more complicated than than anybody thinks about. But I mean, this is an extraordinarily complicated issue simply because the region has been in turmoil for 5,000 years practically. So it's not exactly something that can be solved in a short period of time.
Hold on. Point of order. Just make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. We're talking about the Middle East. You at least. No, that's okay. Keep going. I just want to make sure we start with
okay.
That.
I'm sorry. I can go fast. Let me assure you. So you already seen that happen. It's the Middle East and how it's an area of the world that has been in conflict for, like I said, for thousands of years, and certainly. It's been viewed differently in the West than it is in the East. I mean, there's trouble in the Far East with the the religions that have cropped up in, say, China, where China has really given Muslim folks a real hassle over there and different things, and then we got going to the West. It's the same, a little bit changing in their view, but. I would like to cover and have you cover for us and everybody is it's two-pronged. What we're going to do immediately and what you kind of picture 25 years from now or even 10. Let's make it even simpler. Let's make it 10 years going forward and what kind of things you've seen and learned and think about
So I
that
think
region
there's a
from that
number
standpoint?
of there's so many layers to this, right? You get some folks that take a very concrete knee-jerk reaction. We have to say yes or no. We have to work with people. We have to have sanctions. We have to have military action. We don't. I mean, there's so many points to that. But usually, almost all of those quote solutions are really just actions, right? They're not about actually solving the connection problem that is occurring. And so the first thing I start with is religion. We have some major differences in our religion. And I know that there are concerns in the way that the Quran is interpreted, but very few people have actually read it. And so through this process, one of the first things I did was pick up the Quran, and I have been reading it. Now, I'm not all the way through it, but it's very interesting how incredibly similar it is to many of the teachings of the Bible. There are some key differences in the way that it's a little clearer, where the Bible tends to have more stories and metaphors. The Quran is more, if you get divorced, this is how you handle it, and things like that. But the assumption that it is more destructive than what we find in the Bible, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. There is a lot of negativity in the early parts of both books. And we need to understand that it often comes down to interpretation. So we think that's the first, is the differences in religion, because those drive so much of how this is affected. And then this second one that we run into is, what are the differences in the way that we run our countries? So we are we say we're democratic, although I was reading this morning how some of the international articles that are being written about the new laws coming into some of our states about abortion rights are more restrictive and punitive than they are compared to even Sharia law. That should concern people when our country is more punitive than they are in the Middle East. Now, it wasn't all the countries, but about half the countries are now being stated as more liberal than ours, which is an interesting point. So it's something that we have to look at, because we're not, I know Tulsi's talked a lot about, we shouldn't police the world. And when you say it like that, I agree, we shouldn't police the world. But it's, of course, much more complicated than that, right? And so here is my approach. Number one, you have to look at safety. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. And it doesn't matter what your approach to governing your country is. If you're at a point where you are causing undue harm to your people, I'm not talking about putting somebody in jail because they broke the law and the law is reasonable. I'm talking about, in some cases, we see this more in the African countries, but chopping up children, or like we see in Syria, gassing children, or as we see in the Middle East, some of the way Sharia law is interpreted, which is not universal, just to be clear. So the point at which you have a safety issue that is against humanity, I really think we have to be clear about how we handle that. But then you get to that next layer, which is, okay, now where's that gray spot where it's not clear, is it against someone's personal rights if they're required to wear not a hijab, not a head covering, but a full burqa? Now we're into a bit of a gray space for women's rights and religious preferences, and it has to be decided as we go forward. And then you have that top layer, right? Now you're into economic differences and into the military space. From a military perspective, I'm pretty careful about saying too much at the strategic level. I believe a lot of what's going to happen with the Middle East going forward is going to be intellectual and psychological warfare, and a whole lot less about stuff that we're going to be able to share in an unclassified space. The point at which you're giving everybody how you would handle that strategy, I think, is like giving somebody your playbook. nobody calls the opposing team as they prepare for the Super Bowl and says, hey, we just want to tell you all of our plays. So I think we have to be very, very careful. We put our military men and women in harm's way if we go that route too far. But I think at the military level, you have to look at, one, how do we make sure that we've got safety in place for the people in ours? Two, do we make sure that we have a presence so that there's always an understanding that we are capable and ready at all times? And then three, we have to work with our political leaders so that we have that civilian military shared space. I think Secretary Mattis, or former Secretary Mattis, said it best: lead with the power of inspiration, backed by the power of intimidation. And that means you need your president and your cabinet leaders to be discussing internationally, working closely with your military to have that backup plan. I know that's a lot, but I really feel like the Middle East is a complex space. And if you don't cover all of those layers, you run the very real risk of just putting Band-Aids on things.
Yeah, I'll go a little further on the military side and occupation. I mean, or leaving having a presence in the area. You know, we've maintained a presence in Europe and a presence in the Far East since World War II, and it seems like people don't understand it, or they want to withdraw from the Middle East and acting like we don't have a presence in other areas to maintain peace around the world. I think it would be a mistake for us to leave there. That's my personal belief, simply because for the same reasons we stay have presence in the Far East and presence in the European theater. To maintain peace, and that's not to be the police force around the globe, but in our case, we have the resources to do it, and we have the means, and we do certain things a little bit different than the rest of the world. They'll protect a little bit of space, but they're not so interested in the global picture of what's going on as far as, or can't afford it. We expect them to help pay for it, which I think has kind of been a good move, is to get some of that money back that we've spent doing and helping out there. But our presence in the Middle East is leaving would be very destabilizing, I feel, for the whole area from a global standpoint. I think and I don't know what our military leaders believe in that, and I know you can't disclose any of that or want to talk about it, but the fact is I think it's important. So I hope that we can keep that going, but keep our troops out of harm's way. We don't suffer injury to our folks, over there or in the other two theaters like we do in the Middle East. I think their exposure is extreme simply because of the way we're viewed and what's going on. I think your approach is that we have to finally get to a point where we can feel comfortable in an area with our allies in that area and feel comfortable that they're going to receive us with some type of open arms. So it'll never be fully open armed, but it'll be somewhere where we're tolerated at a very peaceful basis, and we're there for the purpose of helping them, and we continue to help them grow economically and help them grow for safety, for their own sake and everything like that, so they can prosper. I mean, that's the whole reason for all of this, is to keep so people can prosper and grow and be better individuals within the region. So occupation for not occupation, I think that's a bad word. Keeping a presence in the area is important from my standpoint, and a great deal of the people that I know feel basically the same way. When I say basically, there's some that are more let's punch them in the mouth type style, but I'm a little more passive in making sure that we're on a peacekeeping mission, not so much on we want to tuck up, have our chest out and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to do it that way, because that really doesn't benefit anybody. All we do is end up with a lot of our young men being harmed for that reason, and we don't need that. We don't need our young men coming home with a flag over the top of them. So, which this last yesterday was important,
as it was Memorial Day, thinking about all those that we do have killed in action, you're right. That's what we want to avoid. So I want to clarify a couple of points that you just made. Occupation is different than presence. I think you were pointing to that, yes. So presence,
Yes.
from the strategic perspective, is often, it can be the case that you're trying to make sure that people are aware that you can act immediately, but the other reason is to ensure that you're close enough to act as needed. And so we have presence in a number of locations that is not necessarily implying that we are boots on the ground infiltrating everyday life. It may very well be a Navy vessel that is off the coast close enough that given a situation, they are able to react fast enough. A lot of people don't realize how long it can take to deploy. So you have to have enough presence in various regions so that if there is a situation, we as a U.S. force are able to be involved as quickly as possible. The immediate action is actually quite rare in those situations, but that's the point of presence. And of course, then to continue to ensure that that intimidation factor exists in certain cases. But what you're getting at with the Middle East is closer actually to occupation, right? Where there is maybe not quite that word as it's often interpreted, but presence as in they're physically involved. And again, we get into some complexity. Why are we there? What is the goal? Is it to police? Is it to put something back together? Is it to spend dollars? You know, the way money moves in the executive branch, we give out money to contractors, and then the contractors go over there and build various things. And when you get into multi-year contracts, that definitely affects the way money moves in the region. And so depending on who is in power from an administration perspective, you can have far-reaching economic impacts. And I'm not sure everybody thinks of those pieces. It's like, again, I refer to Tulsi and some of her comments about completely not being involved in policing the world, or insinuating that we are in certain environments simply because we want to have a military activity. I would argue there's a lot of reasons that we have military activity that don't necessarily have to do with intention of military action. I think most people know that. So depending on when things started, but it could start, somebody could start something under one administration, and the next administration that picks it up, they can't just, you know, up and move. Now you've destabilized the space and you have to actually deal with it. Whether going in was right or wrong in the initial situation, simply leaving also creates problems. And I think that was a lot of what happened where former Secretary Mattis pushed back with Syria. You know, just pulling troops out created a lot of havoc in the Pentagon because a number of those kinds of concerns. So it's complicated, and it's far more complicated than is easily explainable in a 30-second snippet on TV. And I think because of that, we get a lot of emotions and concerns, and yet everybody's working with about 5% of the data. Very challenging.
Yeah, it's you know, and unfortunately, our going in and coming out, going in and coming out has been a problem. The whole reason we have so much problems in Afghanistan is for that very same reason, because we backed them, and then we left, and then no, we didn't back them, and then they, you know, they don't trust, and you know, we have to be so careful, and I think every administration has to kind of start to think about those kinds of long-term effects. If we don't, I think we're going to continue to have the problems that we are now, because going in and then leaving and making promises and then we can't keep it because another administration comes in and has a different view. Those are very difficult ways of posturing. I think those are, they're dangerous, one, for a lot of reasons, number one. Number two, I think what we were trying to accomplish and what we gave up, we didn't gain. I mean, we actually lost ground. So, you know, and that's the one difficulty about us not having a longer term on some, you know, on some of the thoughts that we do, and restricting. When we make agreements, we have to live by those and stick closer to them and not try to overreact. But that's a tough call too, because somebody might have made a very bad decision and agreed to something very bad, and then how to get that fixed, and so I don't, it's not as simple as me making that statement. I understand that, but for the safety of everybody, and concerns for us all. Um, if you were confronted with some of the things that have gone on, I mean, let's take the Israeli Gaza problem that's going on currently, and it's surprising that in the almost 70 some years now that agreement was formed, and that Israel was formed, and after the World War II, how it never really was done very well to begin with. I thought they tried to put a Band-Aid over as you termed one time, I heard you saying, on a severed arm. I mean, it hasn't worked really, really well, and it hasn't really improved the region. It has improved economically, at least in the view of Western, standards. It's improved economically in that way. However, as far as conflict, it hasn't made it any safer. I don't see in the 70 years or longer that region has been, had Israel in, and with Sudan and all that we've improved the relationships over there. I mean, I've lived through the 5-day war in Egypt, and those different things, and the coal and all those things, and I don't see that the tensions really have been resolved. I wish we could get some kind of resolve to it. I don't know if America could make that happen. I don't know how that would filter out. There's so many different issues, but that bothers me about that. I think that region needs to be stable, and I hope that someday we can all live in peace and that whole thing. I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record from the Vietnam era, but
Dad. You're a beauty queen. You're gonna wish for world peace.
A what? Well, I've always wanted
I don't know that that's entirely possible. We're humans.
I know.
And yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah. Well, I can always wish for what I want and what I'd like to see. It's kind of funny. In the last week or so, because I knew we were talking about this, for some reason I went back and started listening to Joan Baez, for God's sake, and listening to the songs and the words, and they're so similar. I mean, the conflict and the problems didn't change from when we were talking about it back in the '60s to what they are today. And I wish we could improve faster as humans. Why can't we change a little faster? But that's it. And some of the folks, I did talk to some folks at the Legion and at the V and stuff about this subject, and their views are quite similar because of where we came from and what we went through and different things and experienced since you talk to what's going on, and they're worried about the American way of life that they knew is going to be lost if that's and I know I'm getting a little off the subject of the Middle East, but the fact is I think that it kind of goes to the view of the public about, we have an American way of life, and there's a totally different way of life over in that area, and we don't know how to accept it or not accept it, or we just don't want it to be destructive and unsafe for anybody. And I can talk about women's rights, children's rights, whatever we can go. Is it unsafe? Is it? I mean,
what
people deserve opportunity.
I think this is a great question, and this is something
to make their lives better.
That really needs to be tackled. What is the fear? What is the quote American way that everyone is afraid is going to be lost?
I think one of the things that they fear, and it's kind of that gray cloud, we don't know totally what's inside, but the fear is that we've always had the freedom to do a number of different things. Um, and I and I think they're feeling like they could be threatened by a religious type environment that would take over. I don't know that that's totally true. I know it's. I think there's a mandate for dominance on religious aspects. I think religion will always be a problem. It doesn't matter which religion we talk about; it's always been a problem. But I think they worry about things that are actually domestic problems that they think are being caused from the outside. I think and people might disagree with me, but our own safety within our own neighborhoods is bothering us. We worry about, can our children still run down the street and not have to worry about whatever predator or whatever thing is going to happen. Our fabric is being unwoven of safety within our own environment, and I think we're floundering at how to fix that. And I don't know that that's
No.
Middle East driven. It doesn't ever, but
I
it's not.
understand that it is,
it's
so
definitely
I'll put on
not.
my psychologist hat here for a moment, right? What I see when someone uses those words and is concerned is there are things happening that I don't know how to handle. There are things happening that are confusing to me, and that makes me feel afraid. And typically, the very basic way to handle that is education, right? To put people into spaces where they can learn about each other. I often refer to New York City as the model city for the country. When you are in New York City, and I've done a fair amount of picture taking on the subway and various places, and I always find it fascinating. I can sit on a subway and see, bless you, Dad. I can see 15 different cultures and 5 different languages being spoken all at once. And it's fine.
Right.
It doesn't mean they always agree with each other. But my goodness, anybody comes into New York City, they become family real quick, right? They may intra-fight at times or disagree, but that becomes a very locked, tight space. And that access and connection, thanks, Teresa, it allows that understanding to develop. It allows people to have that time to recognize we are all human. And then we have above that some differences in perspective, differences in experience, and differences in belief systems. But at one level, we are all very much the same. That said, there are bad actors in this world, right? There are people who do terrible things, no question about it. The question that I push back on oftentimes is, have we mistakenly assumed that because we see one person do something and they are a part of a particular group, whether that be by race or age or gender or background or experience or knowledge, we over assume that anyone is exactly the same. I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with race. On my birthday, no less, someone sent a Facebook, what I call nastygram, right? And it was all about how if you're a Democrat, you represent the devil. And then it just went at me after that. And we actually were able to dialogue because I don't get stirred up very easily. So I kind of thought, well, that's a heck of a overgeneralization, right? Clearly not all Democrats are exactly the same. And I don't think I've really had anybody call me the devil before. So I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about me specifically. But clearly this person has had a bad experience with somebody or has perceived something negative and now has decided that 50% of our country represents the devil. Wow, that's an overgeneralization, right? But it makes it very easy to lump everybody into a space. So in official terms, what we use in military, we call this heuristics. And what you're looking for is how you basically define and group people. And when you group them and define them in ways that are not very accurate or are based on just a few experiences or perceptions, you end up creating a lot of problems for yourself and a lot of fear. And I think that's what we have right now. The Muslim religion in and of itself is not a hateful religion. That doesn't mean that there aren't extremists who are bad actors that use it as a weapon. They do. But we also see that in the Christian religion, there are extremists who misinterpret, I would say misinterpret the Bible to use it as a weapon to control people. There are people in every religion that do that. There are people in science that do that. There are people who are poor, who are rich, who are in between. People will manipulate information to use it to their advantage at every level from every perspective. That doesn't mean the information is bad. It doesn't mean that the message is bad. It means that you have a bad actor misusing it. And we need to be very clear about that, because when we aren't, then we become prejudiced against a group of people who probably, or at least maybe, haven't done anything to deserve it. We've overgeneralized. But the second point is that you talked about looking around and feeling like things are less safe. It doesn't have anything to do with the Middle East. That has to do with overpopulation. Plain and simple. We have more people. And when you have more people, you have more differences. And when you have more differences, you're going to have some bad actors who do bad things. That actually is one of the more simple points.
Well, you and I have talked about population long before you even thought about going into politics.
Well,
so you know my feelings about overpopulation in the world and how it impacts. Oh no, we can't go into that subject. We aren't going to go there. What we're going to talk about, though, is one of the things that I thought your speech or your talk about New York and being homogenized into a real different society. I think one of the things that's the pushback, and this is where when you get out of get west of, say, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and you start to get out to the Middle East, West, the Midwest, and then far west. But as you transition across that whole area, it's funny how the look is real different about how we feel about the Northeast and the concentration of population that lives in the Northeast versus the population that lives in Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and that type of thing. And one of the things that you talk about, we get on a subway, you're very, about the West and everything like that. They like their personal space on a different level. I mean, where it's wide open and it's very far reaching. They don't want personal space to be included only 1 foot from their face. I mean, that's just very unacceptable in their presence in their world. And that's one of the reasons why they live there, for one reason. I kind of agree. I like the space a little bit. I could never live in a New York or anything like that. I would enjoy it. I don't like that many people around me. Heck, we live here in a small town in Bradenton. Okay, well, the first thing, as much as we love having all the people come down for their 4 months of season down here, you could, to a person, basically, you could talk to them. We're happy when they all go home because we're so tired of the traffic jams, you can't move anywhere, you can't go shopping. We're used to hopping in a car and being able to drive 10 miles in 10 minutes. I mean, it's not, it's disturbing. And so that in itself is something that, goes along with what we're talking about in some fashion or form. I'll go back to the Middle East, and I think we should kind of close that out for your discussion today. I wrote up some things and I didn't know if people wanted to talk about, are we only there to protect American interests, or are we there for global interests? I think in a roundabout way, we're there for global interests. Obviously, I totally believe we're there for our American interests, in the region. And that goes for our global presence wherever we are. It's definitely for our own good. And, I did ask the one question that I had down, how do you see any kind of resolve in the next, I put 25 years in my question. I don't know. I mean, I think that's a troubling point for a lot of the folks that I talk to and I am around is there an end? I mean, we didn't see an end to the conflict that we all went through in the 60s. We saw it kind of dissolve into a mishmash of whatever, and there was a lot of loss during that period. it's a different loss today. I think the young men and women who are in that theater suffer from a different type of loss than what we did. Um, they lose trust because they don't know who to trust within the own realm that they live in. We at least understood that we could trust at least our own realm. You know, they're spread kind of thin, so they're not sitting there and they have to integrate into the societies there at some point where you didn't have to do that over there. So as much as you do now, and I feel sorry for them when they come back and find that. But in 25 years, do you see an end? Do you see
the reality is that
resolve?
The reason that you don't see changes massively is because human beings at our core will fight for resources and for leadership. And so these tendencies are more biologically driven than anything, and so they continue. There is one possibility of change, and I would say it involves, one, creating more space to be able to handle the inhabitants that will be here in 25 years, because obviously our population growth will expand substantially. And then two, creating the capabilities within each human to be able to be ready for what the world is going to look like in 25 years. And that is where I get to this concept of build a ready nation, because what I saw in the Pentagon, what I saw being discussed in the research across the departments, was a real concern about those three areas I talk a lot about: digitization, recognizing we're going to be a digital society. You can dislike it, but you can't stop this train. Automation, again, you can disagree with it, you can put sanctions on, but the reality is that cost-wise, businesses are going to go that direction. So much smarter to prepare for it than it is to regulate against it. And then three, globalization. Again, that train has already left the station. I know there was a lot of arguments about it probably 15 to 20 years ago, and there continues to be in certain pockets. But anybody who picks up the phone and wants to buy a t-shirt and finds it cheaper online when they can order it somewhere else does so. And that's at the individual level. At the business level, where that savings is multiplied, no question people are going to buy it. And if you regulate it entirely, you just end up having businesses that can't compete, or you have businesses that now actually are kind of meta capable, meaning they'll just move. They will literally just move their businesses. And so I don't know that that's fightable. And so the alternative is really this preparation piece. So what I often say is that, the nation that tries to keep up will still be here in 25 years. But the nation that actually builds capability and actually gets its people ready for 25 years from now, they are going to thrive, right? So there's a difference between survival and thriving. And we have the opportunity to thrive. We have all the raw resources we need. They are not being connected in a way that will put us there. And unfortunately, politicians are rarely trained in the ability to see how we would build this concept out. So we're going to see if we can do it. I mean, this is where I am trained. So this is what I do. And I know that we have all of these resources, meaning our community leaders, our political leaders, and our thought leaders. It's connecting them all. So it's not that I have all the answers. It's that I know how to do the connection that matters. And that's what creates the possibility of what you're aiming toward, but it certainly doesn't guarantee it. And no, I don't think we'll get away from all wars. If it's not war, then it'll be Mother Nature, right? So you have to prepare for either, but you're going to have to get into more space. So you're talking off-world travel, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to close out one last thing for you. I think you need to just cover your Thursday situation. Your announcement, what's going to happen. I'd also like you to just make a clear statement about Ready Nation and what it's
sure.
what it's about.
Thursday is our big kickoff.
Okay.
We are going to be meeting in person at 6:30 p.m. locally. And then we will be online at 7 p.m. doing a Facebook Live. It will be me, and I will be talking about what do we mean by Build a Ready Nation? What is it that I'm doing by going around the country and interviewing and investigating all these different groups across the 50 states? Why are we doing this, and what do we hope to have at the end? And then after I speak, and I'm not actually a big speaker, so it'll be tight. With me will be a number of individuals that fall into those three categories I mentioned: political leaders, community leaders, and thought leaders. And my goal is to really act as MC, to have each of them say something about their organization, because they are the deep dive, right? My job is to connect all of them. Their job and interest is to be able to get into the weeds of all of these issues and to be able to help create the solutions. When we connect the dots, we're much stronger. So the definition of a ready nation, the point of it is to literally build a nation ready for the future. And so what I would say to most people is that whatever, especially anyone who's lived 80 to 100 years, the changes that you've seen in your lifetime are pronounced. They're almost unimaginable. The changes that we will see over the next 25 years will equal or exceed that number because of the digital space coming into everything that we do. So it doesn't matter if we're talking education, we're talking healthcare, we're talking defense, we're talking jobs. All of these will be affected by the significant changes. And if we're not ready, then we're into that survival mode instead of thriving. And it has to include being ready for natural disasters, being ready for military disasters. And the reason I think we need to focus forward is because that's the job of the federal government. Right? At the community level, we should be dealing with the immediate. At the state level, we should be dealing with 1 to 5 years out. And at the federal level, we should be dealing with the international space, military space, and that forward space, which is going to be your 15 to 20 years out. So it's not so much that we don't do both. It's not that we do one or the other. We need to do both. All right. Thank you, Dad. I will see you next week. We will be on the road next week. So this will
I love you.
live
You take care.
For real then.
We're going to be there.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. Good.
We're going to be there on Thursday, by the way.
We can get there. And
yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Right. We've been trying to encourage anybody and everybody to come. We're even trying to see if somebody wants to ride with us and that type of thing, to bring them up and be there for you. So everybody, this has been our best one, I think.
Yes, we'll have this Facebook Live thing down by the end, right? Thanks, Dad. I will see you Thursday.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely. All right.